Noah raised an eyebrow, giving Tate the side eye. You want that perv in your bed instead of me, Noe. That guy has a name, Tate. You know what I mean. Noah smiled slightly. I just told you I can spend time with whomever I want. Tate looked offended. And so can I. Exactly, Noah said. Tate crossed his arms. You're doing this to prove a point. No. Yes, you are. Noah shrugged. I need Mark. Tate sighed. You're impossible. No, I'm reminding you of your own words. My words were about you having boundaries. And this is one. Tate stared at him. Noah continued calmly. You can date whomever you want, you can bring people into your life, I can do the same. Tate looked away. That doesn't mean I have to like it. No. A small pause. But you have to respect it. Tate didn't answer. Noah reached over and turned off the lamp. Good night, Tate. Tate looked at him in disbelief. Good night. Yes. You're really doing this. Noah turned away, pulling the blanket up. Yes. A few seconds passed. Then Tate spoke quietly. So I'm actually supposed to go to my room. Noah smiled faintly in the darkness. Yes. Tate blew, forced out of his own favorite sleeping spot for a gay substitute. You'll survive. I don't know if I will, Noe. You'll be fine. Tate sat there for another moment, clearly hoping Noah would change his mind. He didn't. Finally, Tate stood up. You know, for someone who hates drama, you create a lot of it. Noah smiled. Good night, Tate. Tate paused at the door. Good night, Noah. He left the room still annoyed, but also understanding the point Noah was making. For once, Noah wasn't running away from the conversation. He was standing his ground. Tate heard the low rumble of a car engine before he even saw the headlights sweep across the front windows of the Rambler. His entire body went rigid. For a second he just sat there listening. The engine shut off. A car door opened. And Tate already knew who it was. His jaw tightened so hard it hurt. Of all the people who could show up at Noah's door tonight, it had to be Mark. The name alone was enough to make something ugly twist in Tate's chest. Mark had always had this way of appearing calm, patient, almost harmless. That was what made Tate distrust him. Mark wasn't loud, he didn't push. Mark didn't demand attention. He waited. 8 years. 8 years of standing close enough to Noah to be there whenever Noah needed someone. 8 years of collecting little moments, little pieces of Noah's life while pretending he was just being a friend. Tate hated that he had to admit one thing though. Mark had patience. The kind of patience that made Tate uncomfortable. Like a lion circling a watering hole, never rushing, never chasing, just waiting for the right moment. And now he was here. At the Rambler. Tate heard footsteps approach the front door. He waited for the knock. Nothing. His eyes narrowed. Instead, he heard the unmistakable sound of the door opening. The anger that had been simmering immediately flared. Noah hadn't gone downstairs. Noah hadn't unlocked the door. Which meant Mark hadn't been standing outside waiting. He had a key. Tate stared toward the entryway, his expression darkening. A key. Just like him. Just like Tate had one. That thought should have made him feel better, but it didn't. Because suddenly it didn't feel special anymore. The thing that had once made Tate feel like he had a place in Noah's life, the trust, the access, the quiet understanding, Mark had that too. Mark could walk into the Rambler without knocking. Mark could enter Noah's home like he belonged there. And that was the part Tate couldn't stand. His hands curled into fists. That man had a key. And Tate hated how much that bothered him. Tate had a long memory. That was both a gift and a curse. In 26 years, he had met many people. He had learned how to read a room, how to notice the things people missed, how to remember the little details that others dismissed. He remembered voices, expressions, the way someone smiled when they were being genuine, and the way someone smiled when they were performing. And Mark reminded him of someone specific. Someone Tate wished he could forget. Mark acted exactly like that person. It was subtle, insidious, and egregious, a pattern that made Tate's instincts flare. The way Mark could step into a space and immediately belong. The way people naturally gravitated toward him. The way he could make everyone feel seen, remembered, and important. He didn't have to force his way into people's lives. He simply slipped into the cracks, became familiar, and became trusted. That was what unsettled Tate. Because Tate had known someone like that before. Someone everyone adored. Someone who could charm entire rooms without breaking a sweat. Someone who seemed like the safest person around. The person everyone defended because they couldn't imagine that there was anything underneath the surface. But Tate remembered what happened when nobody was paying attention. That person didn't need to take anything by force. They waited, they watched, they found the person who was lonely, uncertain, or desperate for connection, and they slowly made themselves indispensable. A predator in the literal, most sickening sense. Tate wasn't thinking of it that way, but someone who could emotionally circle someone until they were the only person left standing beside them. Someone who could create confusion, insecurity, jealousy, and dependence while still appearing completely innocent. And that was the thought that made Tate's stomach tighten. Because Mark was patient. Mark was liked. Mark had a history with Noah. Whether Noah wanted to acknowledge it or not, Mark saw Noah as delicious prey. He wanted to sink more than his teeth into the blonde. Mark definitely wanted to get into Noah's zipper. 8 years of it. Mark waited 8 years to get what he wanted. Tate looked toward the doorway where Mark stood, feeling that old instinct rise up inside him, the instinct to protect, the instinct to question, and the instinct that told him to look past what everyone else saw. The problem was, Tate knew instincts weren't always proof. Maybe Mark was exactly what he appeared to be. Maybe he was simply someone who cared about Noah. But Tate had spent enough time around people to know one thing. The person everyone trusted the most wasn't always the person who deserved it. And that uncertainty was what bothered him most. Tate heard Mark's footsteps on the wooden carpeted stairs. Slow. Steady. Unhurried. Every step felt like it was getting closer to something Tate didn't want to face. For a brief, reckless second, Tate wasn't 26 anymore. He was 18 again. 18-year-old Tate would have grabbed the metal bat he kept hidden away and waited. He wouldn't have cared about consequences. He wouldn't have cared about explanations or misunderstandings. If someone threatened the person he cared about, his first instinct had always been to protect, even if that protection came out messy and destructive. If Mark had been the kind of person Tate believed he was back then, Tate would have made sure he never got close enough to hurt Noah. He would have swung the metal bat, breaking Mark's kneecaps, protecting and holding the line so no evil man could cross the threshold into Noah's room. But Tate wasn't 18 anymore. He knew better. He knew exactly what would happen if he acted on that anger. Noah wouldn't see it as protection. Noah would see it as Tate crossing a line. And worse, Tate would lose the one thing he was terrified of losing. Access to Noah. Access to Noah's good opinion of Tate. The footsteps stopped. A moment later, the door opened. Tate immediately went still, lying on the mattress with his eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. He heard Mark step inside. Silence. For several seconds, Mark didn't move. Tate could feel him standing there looking at him. Judging. Wondering. Or maybe just observing. Tate kept his breathing slow and even. Finally, after what felt like too long, Mark stepped back. The door quietly closed. Tate opened his eyes. His chest tightened. Because Mark hadn't been confused about where he was. He knew the hallway. He knew which room was Noah's. That meant he had been here before. A few seconds later, Tate heard another door open. Noah's door. His stomach dropped. Then silence. No creaking floorboards. No awkward pause. No hesitation. And then Tate heard it. The quiet shift of movement from the other room. The mattress. His side of the mattress held an interloper. The place Tate had spent so much time beside Noah, the left side that felt like a private corner of the world that belonged to them. His expression hardened. Mark wasn't just visiting. Mark wasn't just stopping by. Mark was comfortable. Mark knew where to go. And that was the part that hurt. Because Tate knew jealousy was ugly, he knew it wasn't fair, he knew Noah was allowed to have other people in his life. But lying there in the dark, listening to someone else take up space beside Noah, Tate couldn't stop the thought that burned through him. Mark wasn't standing outside the door anymore. He was inside. Tate tried to force himself to sleep. He really did. He closed his eyes and counted the seconds between breaths, trying to convince himself that he was being ridiculous. He told himself that Noah was an adult. Noah was allowed to have people in his life. Noah was allowed to trust whoever he wanted. But every time the house went quiet, Tate's mind filled in the silence. Mark downstairs. Mark was walking through the Rambler like he knew every corner. Mark opened Noah's door as he belonged there. After 30 minutes of staring into the darkness, Tate finally gave up. Sleep wasn't coming. Not with his thoughts running circles around him. In Tate's head, Mark was the lion, calm, patient, always waiting, and Noah was the one Tate was terrified of seeing hurt. It was an unfair comparison, he knew that. Noah wasn't helpless. Noah wasn't something that needed to be protected from the world. But Tate's instincts didn't always listen to reason. They listened to fear. The old Tate, the 18-year-old version of himself, would have done something reckless. He would have let anger decide what happened next. He would have convinced himself it was justified because he cared. The older Tate knew better. He sat there for a long moment, jaw clenched, fighting with himself. Because the truth was, the person he was really angry at wasn't even Mark. It was the feeling. The feeling that someone else could walk into Noah's life and take up a space Tate thought was his. That terrified him more than he wanted to admit. Finally, Tate got up and grabbed his things, not because he wanted to hurt anyone, but because he needed somewhere to put all the energy burning through him. He needed to get out of the house before he said something he couldn't take back. The cold air hit him as soon as he stepped outside. Good. He needed that. He needed the reminder that the world was bigger than one hallway, one bedroom, one moment. Behind him, the Rambler stayed quiet. Noah was still asleep. Mark was still there. And Tate stood in the dark, trying to convince himself of the one thing he already knew. If he really loved Noah, he couldn't let jealousy turn him into someone Noah wouldn't recognize. So instead of following the anger, Tate stayed outside and let it burn itself out. Because the hardest fight wasn't against Mark. It was against himself. Noah had been deep in a dream. A good one. The kind where everything felt easy. He was laughing with Tate standing beside him like they had done it 1,000 times before. No arguments, no jealousy, no complicated conversations, just Tate being Tate, stubborn, ridiculous, protective, and somehow the person Noah always looked for first. Then, bang. Noah's eyes flew open. A second later. Bang bang. He sat up, confused and disoriented, his heart still caught between the dream and reality. What the? Beside him, Mark stirred, blinking awake. He reached over and turned on the lamp, squinting at the clock. What's going on? Mark asked, his voice thick with sleep. Noah listened. Another distant sound echoed from outside. Mark stared for a second. Are we still holding on to Richmond? He asked seriously. Noah burst out laughing. What? Mark rubbed his face. I don't know, it's 11 o'clock at night. It sounds dramatic enough that I assumed the city had fallen. Noah shook his head, still laughing. It's Tate. Mark's expression changed immediately. Tate. I think he's doing practice shooting in the backyard. Mark looked at the clock again. It's 11 o'clock at night, he repeated, yawning. Go play Talia's role and yell at him to go to bed. Noah grinned. You mean like... He sat up straighter and put on his best dramatic voice. Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue. Mark immediately started laughing. Noah continued, fully committed. Get your butt inside and go to bed. Mark covered his mouth, trying not to laugh too loudly. That is terrifying, he said. It works, Noah replied. Mark shook his head, smiling. Poor guy. Noah looked toward the window, still amused. The thing about Tate was that he could be the most intimidating person in the room and somehow still be the person who got yelled at like a misbehaving teenager. A few seconds passed. Then Noah leaned closer to the window. Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue, I swear if you don't shut up, go to bed and be quiet, I'm going to come down there and shove your gun so far up your ass you'll be spitting out bullets. Before he could finish, Mark laughed harder. No, you're enjoying this way too much. No, Noah said, trying and failing to hide his smile. I'm just reminding him that being scary doesn't exempt him from a bedtime. And somewhere outside, Tate, who had been trying very hard to be angry and brooding, heard his full name carried through the night. He closed his eyes. Of course Noah would do that. Of course, Noah knew exactly how to cut through all the anger with one ridiculous sentence. And despite himself, Tate almost smiled. Bang, 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 bang. The sounds echoed through the backyard again. Noah stared at the window, his amusement fatting into disbelief. Tate. He pushed himself up and walked over, opening the window just enough for the cold night air to rush in. Tate. No response. Another shot rang out. Noah frowned. Are you seriously ignoring me? Outside, Tate remained focused on the targets, pretending he hadn't heard a thing. From the bed, Mark let out a tired laugh. He's really committed to the dramatic exit, isn't he? Noah turned around. You think this is funny? A little, Mark admitted, pulling the blanket higher. Not the late-night noise, that part is terrible, but the fact that he's apparently decided the mature response to jealousy is becoming a one-man action movie. Noah rolled his eyes. Tate. Still nothing. Mark shook his head, smiling. He's jealous. Noah sighed. I know. Anytime I'm here in your bed, he gets jealous. Noah looked back toward the window. He has no reason to be. Mark's smile softened slightly. No. No, Noah said firmly. I've told him I'm allowed to have people in my life, he knows that. Mark studied him for a moment. Then what is it about me that bothers him so much? Noah leaned against the window frame, thinking. That was the complicated thing about Tate. It was never just one thing. He doesn't hate you, Noah said finally. Mark raised an eyebrow. He sure acts as he does. No, he hates what you represent. And what's that? Noah looked outside again, toward the figure in the backyard. Change. Mark was quiet. Tate spent a lot of his life expecting people to leave, Noah continued. So when someone new gets close to me, I think part of him wonders if he's about to lose his place. Mark's expression shifted. That's not exactly my fault. No, Noah agreed, it's not. Another distant sound came from outside. Noah closed his eyes. But it is definitely my problem tonight. Mark laughed quietly. You know, for someone who acts like he doesn't care, he cares a lot. Noah smiled despite himself. That's Tate, he feels everything, he just disguises it as anger. Mark looked toward the window. And you're okay with that? Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. Yeah. Why? Because underneath all of that, Noah said, he's the guy who would sit outside my door all night if he thought I needed him. Mark nodded slowly. And the guy shooting outside your house at 11. Noah sighed. Same guy. Mark laughed again. Yeah, that tracks. Noah leaned out the window one more time. Tate. This time Tate finally looked up. What? Noah stared down at him. Go to bed. Tate looked offended. I'm busy. No, you're being ridiculous. A pause. Then Tate muttered something under his breath. Noah grinned. What was that? I said nothing. Good, because I heard I'm going to bed. Tate looked away. But a few seconds later, the backyard finally went quiet. Tate waited. He told himself he was done. He told himself Noah's ridiculous yelling had worked, that he was going to put everything away, go back inside, and pretend he hadn't spent the last hour acting like a jealous idiot. Then 30 minutes passed. The house went quiet. And somehow that made it worse. Because in Tate's mind the silence meant Noah was asleep, comfortable, safe, probably not thinking about Tate at all. Meanwhile, Tate was outside, wide awake, still fighting a battle that only existed in his own head. So eventually, the backyard went quiet again. Not because Tate had won anything. Because he had finally run out of patience with himself. Bang, bang. Upstairs, Mark opened his eyes. He stared at the ceiling for a moment. Bang, bang, bang. Then he slowly sat up. Nope. Noah blinked awake. What? Mark looked exhausted. That's it, I'm going back to my condo. Noah pushed himself up on one elbow. Mark. I'm tired, Mark said, already getting dressed. I have to be up at 8 tomorrow, and apparently sleeping peacefully is too much to ask when there's a jealous, hazel-eyed toddler having a crisis in the backyard. Noah covered his mouth, trying not to laugh. Bang bang. Did you just call Tate a toddler? A very tall, jealous toddler, Mark clarified, a very dramatic one. Noah shook his head. You know he's going to be so proud of himself if you leave. Mark grabbed his shoes. Bang bang. Then he can enjoy his victory. You're really leaving because of him. Mark paused at the doorway. No, he said, I'm leaving because I enjoy sleep and I'm not interested in being part of whatever emotional warfare is happening outside. Noah laughed quietly. Mark pointed at him. Call me this weekend. I will. Bang bang. And tell your backyard security guard to get some therapy. Noah laughed harder. I'll pass that along. Mark slipped on his shoes and headed downstairs. A few minutes later, the front door closed. Bang bang. The sound of his car starting filled the driveway. Tate, still outside, noticed. He didn't move right away. He just listened. The engine faded into the distance. Only then did he finally stop what he was doing and stand there in the quiet. A slow, satisfied smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a victory he was proud of. Not really. Because deep down, Tate knew exactly what he'd done. He hadn't beaten Mark. He hadn't proven anything. He'd just been the most stubborn person in a house full of stubborn people. Still, for one tiny, ridiculous moment, he let himself enjoy the feeling. He picked up his things and headed back inside. When he walked through the door, Noah was standing there waiting for him, arms crossed. Tate stopped. Noah raised an eyebrow. Tatum Joseph Cornelius Blue. The smile vanished immediately. Don't, Noe. Oh, I'm absolutely going to. Tate looked away. Noah. You scared off my guest by acting like a sleep-deprived backyard goblin. I did not. You did. A pause. Then Tate quietly muttered, he left on his own. Noah stared at him. Tate looked away. And Noah, despite being annoyed, couldn't stop himself from smiling a little. Because that was Tate. Impossible. Infuriating. And somehow still the person Noah knew best. Tate walked back into the Rambler with the most ridiculous expression Noah had ever seen. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even remotely humble. He looked like a cat who had somehow convinced an entire room that the missing canary was never his fault. Noah stared at him. Tate. Tate grinned. Ding dong, the witch is gone. Noah blinked. Excuse me. Tate nodded proudly, as if he had just accomplished something heroic. The witch has left the castle. No, Noah said, already knowing exactly where this was going. You are not making Mark into a fairy tale villain because you annoyed him into leaving. Noah covered his face. You're impossible. Tate just smiled wider. Good night, I'm going to bed. He started walking away like the conversation was over. Noah watched him for a second. You're seriously going to act like you didn't spend half the night having a jealous adolescent meltdown? Tate stopped. No meltdown. You were outside. I was busy. You were being dramatic. Tate turned around. Noah. What? Tate's expression softened for just a second. Somebody fighting for you matters. Noah's teasing expression faded slightly. Tate. You don't understand, Tate said quietly. I know I act like an idiot sometimes, I know I get jealous, but when someone matters to me I don't know how to do halfway. Noah looked at him. That was the problem with Tate. The same intensity that made him exhausting was the same intensity that made him impossible not to love. Then Tate ruined the serious moment completely. And Mark is my competition. Noah sighed. Tate. And I won. You did not win. I absolutely won, Noe. You annoyed him into leaving. Still counts. No, it doesn't. Tate walked closer and grabbed Noah's wrist, gently pulling him toward the bedroom. To the victor go the spoils. Noah laughed despite himself. You are unbelievable. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. I'm choosing to hear it as one. A few moments later, Tate was already wrapped around Noah like he had claimed his favorite blanket. Noah stared at the ceiling. Tate. If you honestly think you're going to sleep next to me after you acted like a jealous toddler outside, throwing a tantrum with a gun. First of all, Tate interrupted, rude. No. Second, you never like it when I fight for you. Noah looked down at him. That sentence makes no sense. Tate looked completely serious. It means I like knowing someone cares enough to fight for us too. That quieted Noah. Because underneath all the ridiculousness was Tate's actual fear. Not Mark. Not the key. Not the bedroom. Being replaced. Tate squeezed him a little tighter. Go to sleep. Noah shook his head. You're lucky I love you. Tate smiled against him. I know. You're very annoying. I know. You're also wrong. I know. Noah laughed softly. Tate closed his eyes, completely content. I caught myself a Noe, he mumbled. Noah rolled his eyes. You are such a dork. You're dork. And unfortunately for Noah, that was the one argument Tate was always going to win. Mark is coming on Friday evening, Tate, Noah said. The blonde said it casually, almost like it was no big deal. But Tate noticed. He noticed everything when it came to Noah. The small change in Noah's voice, the way he said Mark's name was like it was a normal part of life, the complete lack of hesitation because to Noah Mark being around wasn't a threat, it was just a friend stopping by. Tate, however, felt his entire body tense. His jaw tightened. His arm instinctively pulled Noah closer against him in bed, like some part of him wanted to remind himself and maybe the universe that this was where he belonged. Noah glanced over. Tate. What? That look. What look? The one where you're already angry at someone who isn't even here yet. Tate looked away, pretending he didn't know exactly what Noah meant. I'm not angry. No. No. You're holding on to me like Mark is going to show up and physically steal me away. Tate frowned. He's not stealing you. Good. But he's annoying. Noah laughed quietly. He hasn't even done anything. He exists very confidently. That's not a crime. Tate was silent for a moment, then pulled Noah a little closer. Well then, I'm just going to have to pick up some more bullets every night he's over here. Noah immediately looked at him. Tate. Tate sighed. I'm joking. Your jokes need supervision. I'm just saying if he's going to keep showing up and ruining my peace. Your peace? Yes. Noah shook his head, already knowing where this was going. Tate continued with exaggerated seriousness. I'll just shoot the target outside until he gets annoyed and goes home. Noah stared at him. Tate. Not at him. That is an important distinction you should probably lead with. Tate rolled his eyes. I'm talking about being dramatic, making noise, being annoying, finding a way to make him regret disturbing my sleep schedule. Noah smiled despite himself. You're unbelievable. Tate settled back into the pillows, still grumbling. I found my way of ridding myself of that sniveling little snake. He can hiss, coil, and strangle prey somewhere else. Noah burst out laughing. You have turned Mark into a cartoon villain. He's suspiciously charming, Tate hissed. He's my friend. I know. The teasing faded slightly. Because Noah knew the real reason Tate was reacting this way. It wasn't actually about Mark. It was about the fear underneath it. The fear that someone could come along, fit easily into Noah's life, and make Tate feel like he was standing outside looking in. Noah reached over and touched Tate's arm. You know you're still my favorite person, right? Tate looked at him. I better be. The anger softened. Yeah. Then stop acting like everyone who cares about me is your enemy. Tate thought about it. Can I act like they're mildly irritating? Noah laughed. I guess. Good. But you're going to be nice on Friday. Tate made a face. I can be nice. You can try. That's insulting, Noe. It's accurate. Tate sighed dramatically. Fine, I'll behave if he sleeps anywhere but your bed. Noah narrowed his eyes. Actually behave. A pause. Mostly. Noah shook his head laughing. And Tate, despite all the jealousy and stubbornness, held on to him a little tighter because underneath all the ridiculousness, there was only one thing he was really trying to say. He didn't want to lose Noah. Talia had decided that my latest success deserved a celebration. According to her, buying another company wasn't something that happened every day, and she refused to let me brush it off as just another business deal. The acquisition had been years in the making. I had purchased Ralph's Electronics, a company that had been on the verge of bankruptcy. Most people saw a failing business. I saw an opportunity. Rather than trying to revive the struggling retail side, I converted the property into a manufacturing warehouse where I could oversee production myself. Merging it with my own electronics company streamlined everything. We controlled more of the process, reduced costs, and expanded faster than I ever imagined. Uncle Tim had made it possible. He had followed Uncle Joey's last wishes to assist me in my business expansion. Years earlier, when I needed capital to grow, he had given me an interest-free loan. Joey never treated it like charity. He simply believed in me before anyone else did. Every payment I made back to him felt like another step toward proving his faith had been justified. He never missed an opportunity to brag about me either. "My other nephew is an entrepreneur," he'd proudly tell anyone who would listen. "Just wait, he's the next millionaire." For once, Uncle Tim had been right. I earned my first $1 million about a year after I finished paying off the 15% business loan Uncle Joey had given me years before. Paying him back had been one of the proudest moments of my life. It meant I'd built something real, something that could stand on its own. By then, Uncle Joey was already battling cancer. After his diagnosis, we spent hours talking on the phone. Some conversations were about treatment, some about family, but many were about business. He loved hearing every new idea I had, every expansion plan, every risk I wanted to take. He listened patiently, offered advice when I asked, and reminded me that success wasn't measured only by profit, but by the people I helped along the way. One evening, he admitted he'd quietly made plans for after he was gone. "I left something for the business," he told me, "not for you personally, for the company. I wanted to keep growing." I tried to tell him he didn't have to do that, but he only laughed. "I know I don't have to, I want to." The amount wasn't enormous, but it was incredibly thoughtful. In his estate planning, he'd established a separate fund dedicated solely to the future expansion of my company. Uncle Tim would serve as the executor, releasing the money whenever it was needed for growth. Whether I needed help covering a mortgage on a new building, purchasing equipment, or managing the overhead of another expansion, those expenses would be paid from the fund Uncle Joey had created. He had arranged everything before his death, so it existed separately from the rest of his estate. Even after he was gone, Uncle Joey was still investing in my future. Every company I purchased, every warehouse I built, every employee I hired felt like another promise kept. I told Uncle Joey I would become the best entrepreneur I could possibly be, not because I wanted to be rich, but because I wanted to honor the faith he and Uncle Tim had placed in me. So far, I have been keeping that promise. In my office at our downtown headquarters, one thing stood out above everything else. Hanging directly over my desk was a framed photograph of Uncle Joey, adorned with a black ribbon. Beneath it was a simple brass plaque that read, "Joseph Totem Cornelius Blue. Rest in peace, loving mentor and beloved father figure. 1950-81993. First investor in this business. He saw something special in a young CEO and chose to build a legacy that would outlive him." I looked at that photograph every single day. Whenever I faced a difficult decision or wondered whether the risk was worth taking, I'd glance up at Uncle Joey's smile and remember the faith he'd placed in me long before anyone else believed I could succeed. That photograph wasn't there to remind me of what I'd lost. It was there to remind me of the promise I'd made to him, to build something worthy of the chance he had given me. Every year, a small percentage of the company's profits was donated to charity. Some of the money supported organizations that Talia had founded or continued to operate, while the rest went to causes that helped families in need, children's programs, cancer research, and our local hospital. It was a tradition I refused to break. Whatever money remained after those donations didn't sit in an investment account collecting dust. It went right back into the company through expansion, new facilities, better equipment, and the creation of more jobs. If it wasn't helping the business grow, it was helping people who needed it more than I did. Uncle Joey had invested in my future. the least I could do was invest in someone else's. Not long after I earned my first $1 million, I received an invitation that surprised me more than any business offer ever had. The dean of UCLA's School of Business asked if I would speak to one of the senior business classes a few days before their final exam. Apparently, word of my company's rapid growth and acquisitions had spread farther than I'd realized, and they wanted someone who had built a business from the ground up to share a real-world perspective. Standing at the front of that lecture hall was far more intimidating than negotiating the purchase of a company. Hundreds of students sat in front of me, each of them wondering what their own future would look like after graduation. I didn't begin with my success. I began with where I'd come from. I told them about the uncertainty, the long nights, the mistakes, the risks that kept me awake, and the people who had believed in me when I didn't have much to offer besides determination. I spoke about Uncle Joey, the first person willing to invest in a young entrepreneur with more ambition than experience. I talked about Uncle Tim, whose faith and guidance helped turn ideas into reality. Without mentors like them, I admitted, I probably wouldn't have been standing in front of that classroom. Then I told them what I wished someone had told me when I was their age. Don't be afraid of new ideas, I said. The world changes because someone is willing to ask, what if we did this differently? The craziest idea in the room might become the next great company. I paused, looking around the lecture hall. Find mentors who genuinely care about you, not because they expect something in return but because they want to see you succeed. Listen to their advice but don't become a copy of them. Learn from them and then become your own person. The room was completely silent. Never forget where you came from. Success has a funny way of making people believe they did everything on their own. You didn't. Someone opened a door for you, someone gave you a chance, someone believed in you before anyone else did. Remember those people. I smiled before finishing. And when you're successful, and I hope every one of you is, look behind you. There will always be someone just starting the journey you already survived. Be the mentor you wish you'd had. Invest in people. Open doors for them. Help someone less fortunate than you, because the greatest legacy you'll ever leave isn't the money you make. It's the opportunities you create for someone else. When the applause finally came, I wasn't thinking about the $1 million I'd made or the companies I'd acquired. I was thinking about Uncle Joey. Everything I had told those students was something he had taught me first. In a way, I wasn't giving my own speech. I was simply passing his wisdom on to the next generation. After Uncle Joey's death, Uncle Tim and Noah grew much closer. Grief has a way of bringing people together, and for Noah, spending time with Uncle Tim became one of the few things that eased the ache of losing Joey. There were days when the loss felt overwhelming, and being around Joey's older brother made it feel as though a small part of him was still present. Tim understood that without Noah having to explain it. They talked for hours over coffee, shared old family stories, looked through photographs, and laughed about Joey's quirks and stubbornness. Sometimes they spoke about him openly, other times they simply enjoyed each other's company in comfortable silence. Neither felt the need to fill every quiet moment with words. In many ways, Uncle Tim became a bridge between Noah's past and his future. He helped keep Joey's memory alive, not by dwelling on his death, but by celebrating the life he had lived. Every story Tim told revealed another side of Joey that Noah had never known, and every memory reminded him why Joey had been so deeply loved. Noah still missed Joey every day. That kind of loss never truly disappeared. But building a close relationship with Joey's older brother gave him a way to grieve without feeling alone. It reminded him that although Joey was gone, the family Joey loved so fiercely was still there, carrying his legacy forward together. I tried talking to Tate about Uncle Joey more times than I could count. Sometimes, lying together in bed at the end of the day, I'd quietly bring Joey up. I'd tell a story I remembered, mention something he'd once said, or admit that I missed him. Tate's reaction was always the same. He'd tense beside me, mutter a curse under his breath, and finally snap, "Noah, just shut up." It wasn't cruel so much as desperate. The words came from a place of pain he couldn't face. Every mention of Joey ripped open a wound that hadn't begun to heal, and instead of talking about it, Tate tried to bury it. If no one said Joey's name, maybe he could pretend for a little while that the loss wasn't real. But that left me grieving alone. Eventually, I stopped trying to force conversations with Tate and turned to the one person who never told me to be quiet. Uncle Tim. The first time I admitted how much I missed Joey, Tim simply listened. He didn't change the subject or tell me to move on. He let me cry, let me laugh at old memories, and let me say Joey's name as many times as I needed to. If talking about him keeps him alive in your heart, Tim told me gently, then talk about him. So I did. Tim and I would spend hours remembering Joey, his terrible jokes, his generosity, the way he believed in people before they believed in themselves, how much he loved Tate, and how he somehow always knew exactly what someone needed to hear. We spoke about him as if he just stepped out of the room because in many ways his influence had never left us. I wish Tate could have joined those conversations. I knew he loved Joey just as deeply as I did. The difference was that I needed to talk about my grief while Tate needed to hide from his. Neither way was right or wrong, they were simply different. When I needed compassion, I found it in Uncle Tim. He understood that healing didn't come from pretending someone had never existed. Sometimes healing began with simply saying their name. One evening, I came home after finishing a long-distance phone call in my office. As soon as I opened the front door of the Rambler, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone tinkering around in the kitchen. It could only be Tate. Tate was without question the worst cook in Los Angeles. A few weeks earlier, he had nearly burned a hole through the microwave after forgetting to remove a metal cap from something he was heating. The sparks had flown, the microwave had screamed in protest, and I'd banned him from using it ever again. Yet somehow tonight he decided to try his luck once more. The faint smell of something overcooked drifted through the house, and I couldn't help but smile despite the heaviness weighing on my chest. Under any other circumstances, I would have wandered into the kitchen and teased him about attempting to poison us both. Tonight was different. I had spent the entire drive home thinking about Joey. The grief had been sitting inside me for weeks, growing heavier every day, and I couldn't carry it alone anymore. I didn't want to grieve beside Tate because I knew how uncomfortable it made him. Whenever Joey's name came up, Tate would tense, shut down, or lash out as though every memory was another wound he couldn't bear to touch. His reactions weren't cruel because he didn't care. They were the desperate defenses of someone who couldn't survive his own pain. Still, that didn't make them hurt any less. I needed him to understand what those reactions were doing to me. Every time he swore, changed the subject, or made it clear he didn't want to hear Joey's name, it felt as though I was grieving in isolation. Joey wasn't just someone I'd lost. He had been family. I missed him every day, and pretending he had never existed simply wasn't something I could do. Standing in the doorway, listening to Tate clatter around the kitchen, I realized this conversation couldn't wait any longer. I wasn't asking him to fix my grief or even share it. I just needed him to understand that when he pushed my sorrow away, he was pushing me away too. I decided to pull a little prank on Tate after all the anguish he'd put me through whenever I tried to talk about Joey. While digging through some boxes, I stumbled across one that had accidentally been moved into the Rambler when we left Talia's house. It should have ended up in Talia's office, but somehow it had found its way beneath my bed. I'd meant to return it countless times but never got around to it. Talia rarely came to the Rambler because of the distance. We usually saw each other on Sundays, so the forgotten box simply stayed where it was, collecting dust. Curious, I lifted the lid and began sorting through old papers, photographs, and home videos. Buried near the bottom was an old audio tape labeled simply, "Christmas Dinner." I smiled as I slipped it into the player. The audio recording was from years earlier, when Tate was 21. Noah slipped the old tape into the player and pressed play. From the kitchen came the rhythmic thud of Tate's knife as he awkwardly chopped onions for a recipe Noah couldn't quite identify. Pots clanged against the stove, a cupboard door shut, and Tate muttered to himself in frustration. Then the recording crackled to life. For a brief second there was only static. And then, "Hey kid." Joey's unmistakable voice filled the Rambler. Tate's knife stopped mid-cut. The room went completely still. Slowly, almost mechanically, Tate turned toward the living room. The color drained from his face so quickly that Noah thought he might actually faint. His eyes became impossibly wide, fixed on the direction of Joey's voice, every muscle in his body locked in place. He looked as though he'd seen a ghost. For several long seconds he didn't breathe. He simply stared, trying to make sense of the impossible. Joey was dead. Joey had been dead for months, yet his voice, warm, teasing, familiar, was echoing through the house as though he'd just walked through the front door. Don't you think you've had too much to drink, you can't even sit up? No, Tate whispered, barely audible. His chest rose in a sharp, panicked breath. No. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for someone who couldn't possibly be there. Terror replaced confusion. His hands began to shake so violently that the knife slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the cutting board. No, he shouted. Tate opened one specific cabinet above the countertop. It was a place Noah had rarely seen him look before. Tate reached inside and pulled out a bottle of something, keeping it turned away so Noah couldn't see the label. Tate, Noah said cautiously. But Tate didn't respond. His hand tightened around the bottle as he stared at it for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked quickly out of the kitchen. Tate, wait. Nothing. He moved through the Rambler with a purpose that made Noah uneasy, disappearing down the hallway and away from him. Noah stood frozen in the kitchen, looking at the cabinet Tate had opened. The joke suddenly felt a lot less funny. He had wanted Tate to understand how much Joey mattered. He had wanted to break through the walls Tate had built around his grief. He hadn't meant to make Tate feel like he was being hunted by a memory. And now, watching Tate walk away with that haunted look in his eyes, Noah wondered if he had uncovered something much deeper than anger, something Tate had been trying desperately to keep buried. Without another thought, Tate spun around and bolted from the kitchen. Tate, Noah called, instantly realizing the prank had gone much further than he'd intended. Tate didn't answer. He ran through the living room in blind panic, nearly tripping over the coffee table before throwing himself at the staircase 2 steps at a time. Every frantic footfall echoed through the house. No, stop, he yelled, his voice breaking. A second later, his bedroom door slammed so hard the entire Rambler shook. Silence. Only Joey's recorded laughter continued drifting through the speakers downstairs, making the empty house feel eerily alive. Standing in the living room, Noah felt every trace of amusement disappear. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. For one horrifying moment, Tate had truly believed Joey had come back. At first, Noah almost laughed. The sheer absurdity of it all, the tape, the panic, Tate sprinting out of the kitchen as though the devil himself had called his name, had seemed like the perfect payback for every time Tate had shut down a conversation about Joey. But as the seconds passed, the smile disappeared from Noah's face. He could hear it. Upstairs. The faint, unmistakable sound of someone trembling. Noah hurried up the long staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. When he reached Tate's bedroom, he pushed the door open just enough to peek inside. Tate. No answer. The room was empty. Then Noah noticed the blanket hanging over the edge of the bed. He knelt down and looked underneath. Tate, a 26-year-old man who was fearless around almost everyone else, had curled himself into the smallest ball he could manage beneath the bed frame. His knees were pulled tightly against his chest. His thumb was pressed against his lips in an unconscious attempt to comfort himself, and his entire body was shaking so violently the bed rattled above him. His teeth chattered uncontrollably, and his eyes were squeezed shut as tears streaked down his face. He looked utterly terrified. For one impossible moment, Tate had believed Joey had come back from the dead. Not as the loving uncle he remembered, but as something impossible and horrifying. Someone who had died, been buried, and somehow returned. Noah's stomach dropped. If anyone had only heard about the prank, they probably would have laughed. But seeing the raw terror on Tate's face erased every trace of humor. His expression wasn't embarrassment or annoyance, it was pure panic. It was the look someone might have if they believed they were standing face to face with the worst nightmare they could imagine, something that simply wasn't supposed to exist. Noah crouched beside the bed. Tate, he said softly, come on, it's okay. Tate didn't move. It isn't a ghost. No response. It was just a tape, an old Christmas recording. I found it in one of Talia's boxes. Noah swallowed hard. I was trying to play a prank on you, I'm sorry. Tate remained hidden beneath the bed, trembling so hard he couldn't seem to stop. There isn't anyone here, Noah continued gently. Joey isn't in the house, you're safe. Still nothing. Noah rested his forehead against the side of the bed frame and sighed. I shouldn't have done that. The only sound that came from beneath the bed was Tate's ragged breathing and the quiet chatter of his teeth as he stayed exactly where he was, unable, or unwilling, to come out. After seeing the fear in Tate's eyes, Noah realized this had never really been about a prank at all. It had stumbled into a wound that was far deeper than he had ever understood. An hour passed before Noah heard movement upstairs. He looked toward the staircase as Tate slowly came down. He looked different than before, not panicked anymore, but drained, like he had spent the last hour fighting a battle nobody else could see. Tate didn't say anything. He walked straight into the living room. Noah sat quietly on the couch, unsure of what to say. Tate had eventually come back inside and taken a seat across from him in the living room. The distance between them felt heavier than the space itself. Normally, Tate would have filled the silence with a joke, a sarcastic comment, or some complaint about something trivial. Tonight he said nothing. He sat in the chair facing the couch, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on a spot beside Noah. Not at Noah. Not at the television. At the empty space on the couch where nobody was sitting. For 20 minutes, Tate stared at that spot like he was seeing something Noah couldn't. Noah didn't interrupt him. He had learned that sometimes forcing Tate to talk only made him retreat further. Whatever was happening inside Tate's head, he was somewhere else entirely. The silence stretched on. Then suddenly, "Damn you." The words came out quietly, but they carried so much emotion that Noah looked up immediately. "Tate." Tate didn't answer. His jaw tightened, his eyes still locked on the empty space. Then he stood. The chair scraped against the floor. Without another word, Tate walked into the kitchen. Noah watched him disappear through the doorway, his heart sinking. Because he finally understood. Tate wasn't staring at an empty spot on the couch. He was remembering someone who used to sit there. Someone who wasn't coming back. And for the first time, Noah wondered if Tate's anger toward Joey wasn't because he didn't love him. Maybe it was because he loved him too much. Tate walked into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. Noah stayed on the couch, watching quietly as he heard cabinets opening and closing. Tate moved around the kitchen with a strange focus, searching through drawers and shelves. It sounded like he was looking for something specific. A few minutes later, Tate emerged. The bottle was still in his hand. Noah studied it carefully. From where he sat, he couldn't make out the label, but it looked like some kind of lemon-flavored syrup. Tate poured some into a glass of water and drank it slowly, almost like it was a routine he'd done 100 times before. Noah didn't ask. "Not yet." Tate set the glass down and looked toward him. "We're going to eat dinner," Tate said quietly. "We'll be back in a few hours." Noah blinked. "Tate." But Tate had already grabbed his jacket. He pulled on his black hoodie, his movements deliberate and calm. The calmness almost worried Noah more than the panic upstairs. It felt like Tate had retreated somewhere far away inside himself. The front door opened. Then closed. Noah followed him to the window. Outside, Tate walked to his car. Noah expected him to get behind the wheel. Instead, Tate opened the passenger side door. He got in. And he just sat there. For the first few minutes, Noah assumed he was waiting for someone, maybe trying to collect himself, maybe making a phone call. But the minutes kept passing. 30 minutes. An hour. 2 hours. Tate didn't move. He sat in the passenger seat of his own car, staring forward, the bottle still nearby, completely still. Noah watched from the window, confusion slowly turning into concern. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing: this wasn't anger. This was something else. Something Tate had been carrying for a long time. After nearly 3 hours, Noah finally stepped away from the window and picked up his phone. There was one person he thought might understand. He called Susie. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Then she answered. "Hello." "Susie," Noah said quietly, "I think I did something wrong." He looked back toward the window, where Tate was still sitting alone in the passenger seat. "I think I accidentally found something I wasn't supposed to find." "Susie," Noah said quietly, "I think I did something wrong." There was a pause on the other end of the phone. "What do you mean?" Susie asked. "What happened?" Noah looked toward the kitchen doorway where Tate had disappeared moments earlier. "I found an old tape," he said. "It was from Christmas dinner years ago. Joey was on it." Susie was silent. Joey was giving one of his speeches, Noah continued. You know how he was. He was joking around, talking about family, telling everyone to be grateful. Tate was 21 in the recording. He'd had too much sherry and Joey was teasing him because he almost fell out of his chair. A small, sad smile crossed Noah's face. It was actually a beautiful memory. Okay, Susie said carefully, so what happened? I decided to play it while Tate was in the kitchen. The silence that followed was longer. You played it as a prank. Noah sighed. Yeah. And Noah rubbed his hand over his face. And Tate thought Joey was there. I think Tate thought the house was haunted or Joey came back as a ghost. Susie didn't respond immediately. He heard Joey's voice, turned around and looked terrified, not annoyed, not angry, terrified. He ran upstairs and hid under his bed. Susie's voice softened. Noah. I know, Noah whispered. I know how it sounds. What did he do after? He stayed there for a while, then he came downstairs and grabbed this bottle from a cabinet, some kind of lemon-flavored syrup or something, mixed it with water, then he went outside and sat in his car for 3 hours. Susie was quiet. Just sat there. Yeah. Noah looked toward the kitchen again. Then he came back inside. He sat across from me and stared at the empty part of the couch for 20 minutes. The empty part. Like someone was sitting there. Susie took a slow breath. What did he say? Noah swallowed. He just looked at that spot and said, damn you. Susie was silent for a moment. Did he say Joey's name? No. But you think he was talking to him? I don't know, Noah admitted. That's the problem, I don't know what was going through his head. The phone line stayed quiet. Finally Susie spoke. Noah, Tate has always handled Joey differently than everyone else. I know. No, I mean differently. Everyone else grieved the person they lost. Tate might be grieving something he never got to say. Noah leaned back against the couch. I just wanted him to understand that I miss Joey. I know, Susie said gently, but maybe Tate does too. Maybe that's the part he's been trying not to feel. Noah glanced toward the kitchen again. The house felt strangely quiet. I think I opened a door he spent years keeping locked. Susie sighed. Then don't push him through it, just let him know you're standing there when he's ready to walk out. Should I call Andrew? Noah asked. His voice was quieter now, the fear underneath it finally showing. If Tate is having a psychotic break or he's delusional, maybe he's not safe for me to be around right now. I don't know what's happening. Susie didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was calm. Noah, before you call Andrew, watch him for a little while. Susie. Listen to me, she interrupted gently. I'm not saying ignore what happened, I'm saying pay attention to what he's doing right now. Is he threatening you? Is he threatening himself? Is he acting like he's going to hurt someone? No. Then don't assume the worst yet. Noah glanced toward the kitchen again. He was staring at an empty spot on the couch. Susie. I know, and that sounds terrifying to watch. But grief can do strange things to people, especially when something brings up a memory that they weren't prepared to face. Noah lowered his voice. He looked like he wasn't even here. Then keep an eye on him, Susie said. Stay nearby, make sure he's grounded. If he starts becoming unsafe, if he talks about hurting himself or someone else, or if he completely loses touch with what's happening around him, then you call Andrew. And if he doesn't? If he's just sitting there, overwhelmed, upset, or stuck in a memory, give him a little time. Noah exhaled slowly. How much time? Watch him for a couple of hours, Susie said. If it doesn't pass, or if you feel like something is seriously wrong, call Andrew. But right now, don't turn a painful moment into a crisis before you know what you're dealing with. Noah looked toward the kitchen doorway. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I didn't mean to do this to him, he whispered. I know, Susie said softly. You were trying to make him remember Joey. You didn't realize he never stopped remembering. Noah closed his eyes. Stay calm, Susie continued. Stay close, and most importantly, don't make him feel like he's being watched, like he's dangerous. He's probably already scared enough. Noah nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Okay. And Noah. Yes. When Tate comes back in that room, don't ask him what he saw. Then what do I say? Susie paused. Say something simple, tell him you're there, let him decide whether he wants to open that door. Why can't Tate grieve like a normal person? Noah asked. There was frustration in his voice, but underneath it was something else, fear. I've never seen Tate cry after his uncle died, Susie, not once. Susie stayed quiet, letting him continue. It was like he had that big seizure right after he got the news and somehow it absorbed everything, like all of his grief went into that moment and then it just disappeared. Noah shook his head even though she couldn't see him. Like a vacuum, but not the kind that sucks something up. It's like there's this empty space where his grief should be and nothing is going into it. Noah. I know how it sounds, but that's what it feels like. It's like his grief is gone, like he never grieved at all. Susie was silent for a moment. It's so unnatural, Susie. Noah, grief doesn't always look the way people expect it to. But this isn't just Joey, Noah said quickly. It was like this with his grandfather, his grandmother, his uncle. Aunt Julia was the same way. Tate has had family friends die too, people who mattered to him, and he doesn't grieve. He lowered his voice. He just absorbs it in those seizures and then it's gone. I've never seen anything like it. Susie took a slow breath before answering. Noah, I understand why that scares you. You're looking for the signs you recognize, crying, talking about the person, breaking down, missing them openly. Those are the ways you process loss. Exactly. But Tate may not process loss that way. Then how does he process it? I don't know, Susie admitted, and I don't think Tate knows either. Noah didn't respond. Susie continued. Some people experience emotions so intensely that their brain and body find another way to handle them. Sometimes people shut down, sometimes they detach, sometimes their body reacts before their mind can even understand what's happening. So you're saying the seizure is grief? I'm saying it may be connected to overwhelming stress or emotion. I'm not saying we know exactly what it means. Noah looked toward the kitchen again. But it feels like he loses the person and then just moves on. Susie's voice softened. Does he really? Noah hesitated. Think about it, she said. Does Tate talk about Joey? No. Does he avoid things connected to Joey? Yes. Does he get angry when you bring him up? Yes. Does he react strongly when something reminds him of Joey? Noah looked down. Yes. Then his grief isn't gone, Noah. She paused. It's somewhere. Noah swallowed. But why hide it? Because for some people, feeling the loss means admitting the person is truly gone. Tate may have learned a long time ago that if he doesn't open that door, he doesn't have to feel what's behind it. Noah sat quietly. Susie sighed. You see someone who doesn't cry and thinks he doesn't hurt, but sometimes the people who seem the most unaffected are the ones who have built the strongest walls. Noah glanced toward the kitchen. And what happens when those walls crack? Susie answered quietly. Then everything they were holding back comes rushing through. Maybe that's it, Susie said quietly. Noah looked up. What do you mean? Maybe Tate doesn't have the emotional or neurological ability to express what he's feeling in the way most people expect. Noah frowned. You're saying he can't grieve? No, I'm saying he may not know how to translate the feeling into something he can process. She paused. Think about it, he might know Joey is gone, he might even be deeply hurt that Joey is gone, but his brain may not be able to separate all the emotions that come with that loss. Sadness, anger, fear, guilt, abandonment, they all become one overwhelming thing. Noah looked toward the kitchen. So instead of crying, he breaks things, he lashes out, he runs away from the feeling. Noah was quiet. Maybe his body understands before his mind does, Susie continued. Sometimes people experience emotions physically before they can name them. The feeling comes in and their brain can't organize it into words. You said before he has arrested development, Noah said. I did. And sometimes certain emotions are too uncomfortable for him physically, Noah. Exactly. Noah leaned back against the couch. It's like he hits a wall, Susie. She listened. His mom explained it to me once. She said Tate just can't deal with certain things. He keeps moving forward as he can handle it, but then he hits this wall. Noah stared at the floor. He keeps bumping into it because he doesn't realize it's there. He thinks if he pushes harder he'll get through it. Then eventually he realizes there's a wall and he can't get past it. And what happens then? Susie asked. He goes backward. Noah's voice became quieter. That's when the self-destructive stuff comes out. The girls, the hookups, the parties, the drinking, anything that keeps him from having to sit with whatever he was feeling. Susie sighed softly. That actually sounds less like someone who doesn't care and more like someone who doesn't know what to do with pain. Noah rubbed his face. Then why does he get so angry when I talk about Joey? Because Joey may be connected to the wall. The wall. The place where all those feelings are stuck. Noah looked back toward the kitchen. So when I bring Joey up, I'm not just reminding him that Joey died. No, Susie said. You may be reminding him of everything he has been trying not to feel. The room went quiet. After a moment, Susie added, Noah, be careful not to mistake Tate's inability to express grief for a lack of grief. Those are two very different things. Noah stared toward the empty chair where Tate had been sitting. And what if he never learns how? Then the people who love him have to stop waiting for him to grieve the way they would, Susie said, and start learning how he shows that he hurts. Later that evening, Noah climbed the stairs and found Tate lying motionless on Noah's bed. Tate, Noah asked quietly, are you okay? Silence. Noah sat down carefully on the edge of the bed. Tate flinched. It's just me, Noah said gently. There's no ghost lurking around the house. I swear, Joey, your grandpa, your grandmother, Aunt Julia, or any of your other aunts aren't coming back to haunt you. I was just playing a prank. He let out a small sigh. I know it was stupid, I'm sorry. For a long moment, Tate didn't answer. Then without warning, he exploded forward. With one powerful shove, he sent Noah flying off the bed. Ow, Noah yelped as he landed hard on the floor, rubbing his sore backside. He looked up at Tate, who still hadn't said a word. Noah couldn't even bring himself to be angry. He'd terrified Tate, knowing how deeply Joey's death and the deaths of so many other family members had affected him. Rubbing his bruised butt, Noah gave a sheepish smile. Yeah, I probably deserved that. Tate remained silent, his breathing still uneven, the fright lingering in his body long after the prank was over. Tate sank back against the mattress, still breathing harder than normal. He glared at Noah, his eyes flashing with anger. Don't ever do that again, Tate barked, ever. Noah stood quietly, rubbing his bruised backside. Or I'll give you the spanking of your life, Tate snapped. Noah opened his mouth to apologize again, but Tate cut him off. Now get out of here. Tate yanked the duvet over himself until only the top of his head was visible. I don't want to look at you for a while. There was a long pause before Tate's muffled voice came from beneath the covers. Go make dinner or do something useful. Noah couldn't help the faint, guilty smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth. Tate hadn't forgiven him, not even close, but the fact that he was ordering Noah around instead of shutting him out completely was a small sign that, eventually, things would be all right. Without another word, Noah quietly left the room and headed downstairs to start dinner. Noah quietly walked out of the bedroom, giving Tate the space he had demanded. He paused in the doorway before looking back. Dinner will be ready in about an hour, Noah said softly. I'll make your favorite. Without waiting for an answer, Noah gently pulled the bedroom door shut behind him. He was trying to apologize, trying to make things right, but it didn't seem like Tate cared. Fucking twat, Tate barked from inside the bedroom. Noah winced at the outburst but couldn't really blame him. The prank had crossed a line and Tate had every right to be furious. With a quiet sigh, Noah headed downstairs to start cooking, hoping a good meal and a little time would succeed where words had failed. Dinner was ready, but Tate never came downstairs. After waiting several minutes, Noah filled a plate with all of Tate's favorites, covered it to keep it warm, and added a dinner roll and a set of cutlery to the tray. Balancing everything carefully, he climbed the stairs and stopped outside his bedroom door. He knocked gently. Tate, dinner's ready. No answer. I made you a plate. Do you want to eat up here or do you want to come downstairs? Silence. Noah slowly opened the door and poked his head inside. Tate. Still nothing. From across the room, he noticed the duvet trembling. His first thought was that Tate must be cold. Setting the tray down on the dresser, Noah hurried over to the bed. Tate. He reached for the edge of the duvet and gently pulled it back. His stomach dropped. Tate's entire body was shaking violently. His muscles jerked uncontrollably, his arms drawn tight against himself as his whole frame convulsed. Tate. Noah's heart lurched into his throat. For one terrifying instant, it looked as though Tate was having a severe seizure. The room seemed to freeze around him as the dinner tray, forgotten behind him, suddenly became the last thing on his mind. The tray slipped from Noah's hands. It crashed onto the floor with a loud clatter, the plate bouncing across the hardwood. By sheer luck, it had been tightly covered with plastic wrap and foil, so none of the food spilled. Noah barely noticed. His eyes were locked on Tate. Tate's entire body was convulsing. His torso arched and twisted while his legs thrashed against the mattress, sometimes kicking over the edge of the bed before jerking back again. The bed frame rattled with each violent movement. For Noah, it was like something out of The Exorcist. He had never witnessed anything this severe before. Tate, he shouted, panic rising in his voice. Tate, can you hear me? There was no response. Adrenaline surged through Noah as he sprinted for the phone on the nightstand. His hands shook so badly that he nearly dropped it before punching in the numbers. 911, he whispered to himself. As the call connected, Noah looked back at Tate, his heart pounding. Please answer, he pleaded under his breath. Please hurry. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The front door flew open as paramedics hurried inside with a gurney and several medical bags. They rushed upstairs, quickly assessing Tate before carefully transferring him onto the stretcher. Within moments, they were wheeling him down the hallway, speaking calmly to one another as they worked. Noah followed them with his heart pounding, feeling utterly helpless. The ambulance sped to the hospital with its lights flashing through the night. As soon as Noah arrived, he began making phone calls. He called Talia. Then Terrence. Then Andrew and the rest of their close friends asked them to come to the hospital. One by one, they arrived in the emergency department waiting room. Poor Talia was beside herself. She burst into tears the moment she walked through the doors and rushed into Noah's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Oh God, not again, she cried. Andrew wrapped an arm around her shoulders, gently patting her back and murmuring reassuring words while trying to keep her steady. Nearby, Terrence sat at the admissions desk, patiently working his way through what felt like a mountain of paperwork the hospital staff had handed him. Every few minutes, another clipboard seemed to appear, and he signed, dated, and answered question after question, doing whatever he could to help while everyone else anxiously waited for news. The waiting room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional sniffle, the distant announcements over the hospital intercom, and every set of eyes turning toward the emergency room doors whenever they opened, hoping someone would finally come out with an update on Tate. A physician stepped through the doors of the ICU, a clipboard tucked beneath one arm and several patient folders in his hand. He scanned the anxious faces gathered in the waiting room. I'm Dr. Coleman, he said. I examined your son. Everyone stood. At the moment, he's unconscious. He experienced a very significant seizure and our immediate priority was to stabilize him. Talia's hand flew to her mouth as Terrence instinctively slipped an arm around her shoulders. Dr. Coleman glanced down at his notes before continuing. We're running blood work, imaging studies, and a full neurological evaluation. Right now, we're trying to determine whether this was an isolated seizure or whether it may be related to a more serious neurological condition. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Has Tate ever been diagnosed with epilepsy or any other seizure disorder? Dr. Coleman looked directly at Terrence and Talia, waiting for their answer as the waiting room fell completely silent. He's never been diagnosed, Talia said, her voice trembling. He has a seizure maybe once every 9 months or so. Every time it happens, there's a different doctor assigned to his case. She wiped tears from her eyes. Because they're so far apart, no one's ever been willing to diagnose him with epilepsy. Dr. Coleman nodded, making notes on his clipboard. I tried to have him evaluated when he was younger, Talia continued, but he wouldn't sit still long enough for the testing. A faint, weary smile crossed Terrence's face despite the circumstances. He bit one doctor, Talia admitted, kicked a couple of nurses. After that, nobody could complete the neurological examination. Doctor. Coleman looked up from his notes. That certainly would have made a full evaluation difficult. He closed the folder. While epilepsy is certainly on our list of possibilities, a diagnosis isn't based on a single seizure alone. We'll review his brain imaging, EEG, laboratory results, and neurological examination before drawing any conclusions. He looked reassuringly at Talia and Terrence. Right now, our focus is on making sure there's nothing immediately life-threatening and determining what caused today's seizure. Once he's stable, we'll have a much clearer picture of what we're dealing with. The couple nodded silently, clinging to each other as they waited for the answers they had been seeking for years. Dr. Coleman glanced down at his notes before looking back at Talia and Terrence. I should also tell you what happened when your son briefly regained consciousness. The waiting room grew still. I attempted a routine examination. I simply asked him to open his mouth so I could see whether he had bitten his tongue during the seizure. He paused. He had. As soon as I approached him with one of my metal tongue depressors, he became extremely distressed. He started screaming. Talia lowered her head. He climbed, or rather fell, off the examination table. In the process, he intentionally kicked over a metal step stool and several trays of instruments. We were concerned he was going to seriously injure himself. Dr. Coleman folded his arms. At that point, he was disoriented after the seizure. He didn't appear to know where he was or what was happening. For his own safety, we had to briefly restrain him until he calmed down and we could continue treating him. He looked at both parents with a thoughtful expression. I have to ask, has Tate always reacted this strongly to medical settings? Talia exchanged a glance with Terrence. Because, Dr. Coleman continued, what I witnessed wasn't just post-seizure confusion. He showed an intense fear response toward the medical staff. He spoke gently. Did you know your son appears to have a significant phobia of doctors and hospitals? No, Talia answered quietly. I mean, he's never liked doctors even when he was a toddler. We always thought it was like kids being afraid of the dentist. She sighed, thinking back. He'd cry, hide under the chairs in the waiting room, and refuse to come out. A faint, embarrassed smile crossed her face. If someone tried to pull him out, he'd bite them. He's been a biter ever since he was little. Terrence nodded. And he's never liked people touching him. Talia finished the thought. Especially male strangers. Dr. Coleman listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting down a note on his clipboard. When she had finished, he nodded thoughtfully. That actually helps explain what we saw. He closed the clipboard. A child who's simply afraid of doctors usually cries, resists, or tries to leave. What I witnessed today was much more intense. After the seizure, your son appeared disoriented, frightened, and reacted as though he believed he was in immediate danger. He looked at both parents. The post-seizure confusion certainly contributed to his behavior, but it also sounds as though he's had a long-standing fear of medical environments and unfamiliar physical contact. Combined, those two factors can produce a very strong panic response. Dr. Coleman offered a reassuring smile. Now that we know this about him, we'll adjust how we approach his care. We'll try to minimize the number of staff entering his room, explain everything before touching him, and make sure he's fully oriented whenever possible before attempting another examination. Talia let out a slow breath, relieved that someone was finally taking Tate's lifelong fear seriously instead of dismissing it as difficult behavior. Dr. Coleman looked down at his notes, his expression shifting slightly. There was something else I wanted to mention. Everyone became quiet. While Tate was confused and agitated after the seizure, while he was trying to push away the medical staff, he kept calling out two names. The doctor looked toward Noah. One of them was Noah. Noah's expression tightened. Talia immediately looked between them. Noah is, she began, glancing at him. They're friends, buddies, whatever you want to call them. Noah is sitting over there. He's the one who called 911 and is responsible for getting Tate to the hospital. She looked back at Dr. Coleman. What was the other name? Dr. Coleman checked the chart. Bennett. The room went silent. Bennett, Talia repeated, her concern growing. That's all he said. Dr. Coleman nodded. Just that name several times. Tate's friends exchanged uncertain looks. Do you know anyone named Bennett? Talia asked. Noah shook his head slowly. No, I can't think of anyone. He looked toward Talia and Terrence. Can you? Talia frowned, searching her memory. No, nobody I know. Terrence shook his head as well. I don't know anyone by that name. Dr. Coleman made another note on his clipboard. Sometimes after a seizure, people can say names, words, or fragments of memories that may not be immediately clear to those around them. It can be connected to dreams, memories, fear, or confusion. He looked back at the group. When Tate wakes up and is more oriented, we can ask him about it. The unanswered name hung in the air. Bennett. Nobody knew who it was or why Tate had called for him. Dr. Coleman took a slow breath and looked down at the paperwork in his hands. Based on what I witnessed today, there is something else we need to discuss. The room grew quiet. With a seizure this severe, I have a responsibility to address safety concerns. Talia immediately looked worried. Are you saying? Dr. Coleman nodded gently. I will need to notify the appropriate authorities regarding his ability to drive. Depending on the requirements in this state, that may involve reporting his condition to the DMV or following the established medical reporting process. Terrence's jaw tightened as he listened. Even if these seizures only happen every 9 months, Talia asked. Yes, Dr. Coleman said carefully. The frequency matters, but so does the severity and the circumstances surrounding them. A seizure behind the wheel could put Tate and everyone around him at tremendous risk. He looked at Noah, then back at Tate's parents. The last thing any of us wants is for him to have a seizure while driving and for a preventable tragedy to happen. Imagine him losing consciousness during rush hour, unable to control the vehicle, and someone getting hurt. He softened his tone. This isn't a punishment, it's about keeping him alive and keeping others safe. Talia looked down, tears forming in her eyes. He's going to hate this. I understand, Dr. Coleman replied. But our first priority is making sure Tate gets the right neurological care, gets evaluated properly, and has a plan in place. Once we understand what's causing these seizures, we can talk about what steps he needs to take to regain independence safely. The words hung heavily in the waiting room. For years, Tate's seizures had been something everyone hoped would simply pass. Now they were something they could no longer ignore. Dr. Coleman made another note in Tate's chart. I'm going to put something specific in his file, he said. If Tate is admitted to this hospital one more time because of another seizure, I want him evaluated by a seizure specialist. Talia listened carefully. He hasn't had one in over a year, Dr. Coleman continued, which means he's not considered an immediate ongoing risk in the same way someone having frequent uncontrolled seizures might be. But if another seizure happens within the next 12 months, we need a more complete evaluation. He looked between Talia and Terrence. He'll need observation, a neurological assessment, and a consultation with a specialist. The goal is not just to label what's happening, it's to understand the progression, determine the cause, and make sure Tate is safe. Dr. Coleman sighed slightly. I'm not a seizure specialist. I know enough to manage an emergency situation, but I don't specialize in the long-term complications and patterns of seizure disorders. He glanced at his notes. We do have a specialist on staff. Unfortunately, they're currently on maternity leave and our interim specialist is attending a conference in San Francisco. He closed the folder. If Tate has another seizure, you can always bring him back here for observation and treatment. We'll make sure the right people are involved. Talia nodded slowly. It really doesn't happen that often, she explained. Usually it's only during extreme stress, too many people in the house, big parties, holidays, losing someone close, things like that. She swallowed. It's not an everyday thing. I understand, Dr. Coleman said gently, and I'm not dismissing that. Triggers and patterns are important information. He paused. But because of the severity of what happened today, I still have to document it and follow the safety procedures. Talia looked toward the ICU doors, where Tate was still being monitored. For the first time, the possibility that these episodes weren't just something they could quietly manage as a family felt real. Dr. Coleman hesitated for a moment, looking down the hallway before turning back to the group. "There is one more thing I need to discuss," he said quietly. "It's a sensitive topic and I would prefer to speak with Tate's parents privately." He looked at Talia and Terrence. "Would you mind following me to my office?" Then he glanced at Noah. "Actually, Noah, I would like you to come as well." Noah looked surprised. "Dr. Coleman explained, you said you live with Tate. That means you need to understand what his family understands. We won't be there 24 hours a day, and if something happens at home, you may be the first person there." Talia nodded slowly. "He should know," she said quietly. Dr. Coleman gestured down the hallway. "When Tate is released, it will be very helpful if someone who lives with him is aware of what to expect." He looked at Noah. "That may mean you will have to help care for him during his recovery. He may be weak for several days. He could be exhausted, confused, or disoriented. After a severe seizure, some people can also become frightened or agitated. In some cases, they may even become physically aggressive because they don't understand what's happening around them." Noah swallowed but nodded. "I'll help him." Dr. Coleman gave a small nod. "Good, then please come into my office." The four of them walked down the hallway. Inside, Dr. Coleman closed the door behind them and motioned toward the chairs. Terrence sat beside Talia, while Noah took the seat across from them. The atmosphere changed immediately. This was no longer just a discussion about tests and paperwork. This was a conversation about what Tate needed after he left the hospital, and what the people who loved him needed to know to keep him safe. Before discussing anything else, Dr. Coleman sat down behind his desk and gestured toward the chairs. "Would any of you like some water?" Terrence and Talia both shook their heads. Noah hesitated. "Could I get a soda, doctor?" Coleman nodded toward the door and a nurse stepped out to get something for him. The doctor folded his hands. "Before Tate knocked over the tray of instruments, there was something important I observed." He looked at all three of them. "Your son was extremely disoriented. He didn't know where he was, he didn't know who I was, and for a period of time he appeared not to fully recognize the situation around him." Terrence leaned forward. "Is that dangerous?" "Not necessarily," Dr. Coleman replied. "Confusion after a major seizure can happen. The brain has essentially gone through an electrical storm and afterward it can take time to regain normal function." He paused. But what caught my attention was the intensity of his reaction. Dr. Coleman leaned back slightly. "I went to Johns Hopkins for my medical training and also studied psychology, but I want to be very clear. I am not a licensed psychologist and I cannot diagnose your son based on one incident." He glanced at his notes. "However, I do need to ask about something I witnessed." Talia looked concerned. "What?" Dr. Coleman lowered his voice. "When Tate was frightened and trying to push people away, did you notice whether he was speaking differently?" Noah frowned. "Differently how?" "His voice," Dr. Coleman explained. "The tone, the way he spoke, the way he expressed himself." The room became quiet. "Is it normal for Tate to speak in a different voice when he's upset, frightened, or confused?" Talia and Terrence exchanged a glance, both thinking back through years of memories. Dr. Coleman watched them carefully. "I'm not saying what it means," he added. "There are many possible explanations, especially following a seizure, but unusual changes in behavior, speech, memory, or awareness are important details for a neurologist or seizure specialist to know about." The door opened and the nurse returned with Noah's soda. But nobody reached for it. All three of them were thinking about the same thing. How much of Tate's behavior had they always considered just Tate being Tate? Terrence frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Dr. Coleman looked down at his notes before answering carefully. "I mean that after the seizure, your son wasn't simply confused. His behavior changed in ways that stood out." He looked between them. At one point he was speaking in what sounded like an adolescent voice. He was also sucking his thumb. Talia's expression shifted. "And then, after several minutes he began speaking in a child's voice," Dr. Coleman continued. If I had to estimate based only on the sound and mannerisms, I would have guessed somewhere between 6 and 8 years old. The room became silent. Then, later, his voice changed again. He began speaking in a deeper, more masculine voice that did not sound like his normal voice. Dr. Coleman paused. Has Tate ever done anything like this before? Noah rubbed his hand nervously. Once. Everyone looked at him. A few weeks ago, Noah said quietly, and once when we were kids. He looked down. He hid under his bed after a nightmare and had a seizure. I thought he was just having a really bad dream. Dr. Coleman nodded slowly. That may have been what happened. It's very possible he was asleep or coming out of a sleep state when that occurred. He made another note. But the combination of things you've described, the changes in voice, the behavior, the confusion, the memories surrounding these episodes, those are all details a specialist needs to know. Talia looked frightened. Are you saying something is wrong with him? Dr. Coleman shook his head slightly. I'm saying I don't know yet. He chose his words carefully. I'm not going to jump to a conclusion or diagnose something I cannot diagnose. There are neurological conditions, seizure-related states, and other explanations that can cause unusual behavior. He closed the folder. But I will tell you this, some of the things Tate said while he was confused were deeply concerning. The room grew still. What did he say? Terrence asked. Dr. Coleman hesitated. I'm not going to repeat it. He looked at them seriously. Not because I don't think you deserve to know, but because right now I don't want to attach meaning to words spoken during a period of extreme confusion. I will document what happened and provide it to the specialist. He took a breath. But I will say this, it wasn't ordinary conversation. It wasn't something I would expect from someone simply waking up after a routine seizure. No one spoke. For the first time, the mystery surrounding Tate's seizures felt larger than anyone had ever realized. Dr. Coleman shook his head, clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation had gone. He was asking, the doctor started. Then he stopped himself. Noah immediately noticed. The hesitation was different from the careful pauses Dr. Coleman had used before. This time it looked like he was choosing what he was allowed to say. Talia sat up straighter. What was he asking? She said, her voice tense. Dr. Coleman looked at her, then at the file in his hands. No, let me explain. I was trying to find out whether anyone else was aware of the things Tate says during these episodes. The room went silent. Noah frowned. Things he says. Dr. Coleman nodded slightly. Tate is an adult. I am not permitted to release everything he said or discuss private details of his conversation without his consent. Talia looked hurt and confused. But he's our son. I understand, Dr. Coleman replied, and I understand why you want answers. He paused. But my responsibility is still to protect his privacy. The doctor looked down at his notes. That being said, I will tell you that some of what he said was deeply concerning. His eyes moved toward Talia. Especially what he said about you. Talia froze. About me. Noah immediately looked between them, unsettled by the doctor's tone. Dr. Coleman didn't elaborate. I am not going to repeat his words, that would not be appropriate. Talia swallowed hard. What did he say about me? Talia repeated. Her voice was quieter this time, but the fear behind it was obvious. Dr. Coleman looked down at the folder in front of him and shook his head. Talia stared at him. But you just told us it was concerning. I know, Dr. Coleman said gently. And the reason I shared that much is because Tate has a HIPAA release form in his file from when he turned 18 that allows certain medical information to be discussed with you. But that does not give me permission to reveal everything he said in a private medical interaction. Noah sat silently, watching Talia's face fall. The doctor continued. I am not going to discuss his treatment conversations or repeat private statements. What I can do is tell you about things that are relevant to his safety and the safety of future providers. Talia's hands tightened together. There was one thing that concerned me very much. She looked up. What? Dr. Coleman hesitated. It was something he called you. Talia went still. Did he call me a slur? The doctor immediately shook his head. Talia looked devastated by the uncertainty. Why? He took a breath. But I will tell you this, Tate crossed physical boundaries while he was in my care. The room went silent. Noah's expression changed from confusion to shock. Tate. Dr. Coleman nodded. I have treated many patients over the years. I understand that people can become confused, frightened, or agitated after a medical event, but there are boundaries that must be maintained. He looked down at his notes. Dr. Coleman looked down at the file for a long moment before speaking. I have never had a patient behave toward me in the way Tate did. The room became completely silent. Talia's expression tightened with fear. What are you saying? Dr. Coleman took a careful breath. I am going to explain this in the most professional way I can. Tate crossed a serious boundary while he was in my care. Noah sat motionless, trying to understand. He removed his clothing and made an inappropriate invitation toward me, Dr. Coleman said quietly. That is the clinical way of describing what occurred. Talia looked stunned. But she struggled to find the words. Dr. Coleman continued. What concerned me was not only the action itself but the manner in which it happened. He was not speaking in his usual adult voice. He was speaking differently. His tone, his mannerisms, the way he carried himself were those of a young teenager. It did not seem consistent with the Tate you are describing to me. Noah looked up. You mean he didn't seem like himself? Correct, Dr. Coleman said. He appeared confused and disconnected from the person I had been speaking with earlier. Talia shook her head slowly. He would never do something like that. I understand why you feel that way, Dr. Coleman replied, and I am not making a judgment about his character. He folded his hands on the desk. The important question is why it happened. Was this related to the seizure? Was it confusion afterward? Was there another neurological factor involved? Those are questions for specialists. Terrence looked troubled. So you think he wasn't aware? Dr. Coleman paused. I think his awareness appeared altered, but I cannot determine the cause. That is why a proper evaluation is important. Noah looked toward the floor, overwhelmed. I've known him my whole life, he said quietly. I've seen him angry, scared, and confused, but this. Dr. Coleman nodded. That is why this information matters, not to shame him, not to punish him, but because anyone caring for Tate needs to understand what happened today and approach him with the appropriate precautions. Talia wiped her eyes. He's still our Tate. Dr. Coleman nodded. Yes, and he also needs help understanding what happened to him. He closed the folder. My recommendation is that his future care team looks at the entire picture, the seizures, the changes in behavior, the confusion, and these episodes where he does not appear like himself. The room fell quiet again. Noah stared toward the ICU doors, knowing that when Tate woke up, the conversation waiting for him would be much bigger than anyone had expected. Talia looked shaken. Is Tate dangerous? Dr. Coleman paused. I don't know, I don't have enough information to make that determination, but I do know that this behavior needs to be documented and evaluated. He closed the folder. I will not be seeing him again as his physician. Talia looked up sharply. You're refusing to treat him. I am making a professional decision, Dr. Coleman explained. Tate deserves a provider who can approach his care with the right boundaries and resources, and future providers deserve to know the history before they begin working with him. He tapped the chart. I will be placing a note in his medical record so that whoever treats him next is not caught unaware. Talia sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. Noah looked toward the ICU doors, his mind racing. A few hours earlier, his biggest fear had been losing Tate during a seizure. Now he was realizing there were pieces of Tate's struggles that even the people closest to him might not fully understand. Then what are we supposed to do? I would strongly recommend that Tate be evaluated by the appropriate specialists, Dr. Coleman said. A neurologist who specializes in seizures and potentially someone qualified to evaluate the psychological aspects as well. He looked at the chart. We completed a full body scan and several in-depth examinations. There are some things that concern me, but Tate is an adult. If he does not want to discuss certain things, it is not my place to force him. The doctor closed the folder. However, there is something else I need to tell you. Everyone became still. I am not comfortable continuing to see your son as a patient. Talia's expression changed immediately. What? Noah leaned forward. Why? Dr. Coleman sighed. Because professional boundaries between a physician and patient were crossed. Terrence frowned. What does that mean? The doctor carefully chose his words. It means Tate attempted to influence how I handled this situation in a way that was inappropriate. Noah looked confused. Influence? Dr. Coleman nodded. He tried to bargain with me. He wanted certain things left out of the record. He was attempting to persuade me not to discuss certain observations. Talia looked down, shaken. That doesn't sound like him. I understand that this may be difficult to hear, Dr. Coleman said, but I am telling you what happened. He paused. There was an attempt to muddy the professional boundaries between patient and physician. Noah's face tightened. What exactly did he do? Dr. Coleman looked uncomfortable. Ethically, he attempted to bribe me. The room fell silent. Talia stared at him. Bribe you? Yes, Dr. Coleman said quietly, not through a normal financial arrangement. He attempted to offer something personal or sexual instead of an appropriate professional resolution. Noah looked stunned. Talia covered her mouth, trying to process everything she had heard. Dr. Coleman softened his voice. I am not saying this because I want you to judge Tate. I am saying it because these behaviors, combined with what happened medically today, tell me he needs a level of specialized care that I am not equipped to provide. He placed the folder on the desk. My role is to make sure Tate gets the help he needs, even if that means transferring his care to someone else. I understand, Terrence said quietly. Dr. Coleman nodded, appreciating that he wasn't arguing or dismissing the seriousness of the situation. Thank you, the doctor said. There is also something else I would like to discuss, but I would prefer to speak with Mr. Blue alone. Talia looked toward Terrence. Of course, she said. Noah glanced between them, unsure what to do. Before anyone could say anything else, Talia touched Terrence's arm. Let's go get something to eat, she said softly. Let Terrence handle the medical and financial conversations with the doctor. Terrence gave a small nod. We'll be back in about 30 minutes, dear. Talia looked at Noah. Come on. Noah hesitated, glancing once more toward Dr. Coleman's office. Then he followed them out. After they stepped into the hallway, Terrence and Dr. Coleman closed the door. Noah stood outside for a moment, staring at the closed office door. Do you know what they're talking about in there? He asked. Talia shook her head. No. She leaned against the wall, exhausted. Terrence has always handled those conversations. Noah looked confused. Why? Talia sighed. Tate has always needed someone who could manage things when they became complicated. Medical appointments, difficult discussions, paperwork, all of it. She looked toward the office door. Our son has neurological challenges. Terrence is the one who handles the conversations that are uncomfortable or overwhelming. Noah nodded slowly. So he's the one who asks the hard questions. Exactly, Talia said. She gave a tired smile. Terrence can sit across from a doctor and talk about things most people would struggle to even say out loud. Noah looked back at the closed door. For the first time that night, he realized how much responsibility Terrence and Talia had carried for years, and how much they had shielded Tate from without making him feel like he was being protected. Order anything you like, Talia said as they sat down at the small cafe in the hospital lobby. She picked up the menu and looked it over. I just hope this food tastes better than cardboard. Noah laughed before he could stop himself. For a moment the sound surprised him. Then guilt immediately washed over him. He looked down. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. Talia looked at him gently. Noah. He glanced up. Tate is upstairs unconscious in a hospital bed, he said quietly. It feels wrong to be sitting here laughing. Talia gave him a sympathetic smile. Believe me, after years of hospital visits, I've learned you have to take the little moments where you can. She looked back at the menu. Tate has been in and out of hospitals since he was a kid. Noah listened carefully to the doctor.